Hello viewers of my channel. Before I start, I want to thank you for your support. It is thanks to you that I publish videos every day. And here is a guy who was lucky enough to be in this video. If you also want to get a chance to be in the video, then write something in the comments and maybe you will be in the next video. And I want to wish you all an enjoyable viewing experience. The old man started to ask for a discount of half the price of the pills, explaining that their quality is bad, while Fong explained that the quality of their pills is good, and proposed to organize a contest to find out. While the old man was surprised that the protagonist could also make pills, while Fong said that he was the best alchemist in the place, the protagonist then proposed a deal, namely if the old man won, he would get a discount, but if Fong won, the old man would buy the pills at the market price. The old man was happy about this opportunity, while the man thought that the protagonist would go into a big disadvantage with such deals. The old man thought that he could easily defeat the protagonist, and thought that such pills at half the price was a good deal. A while later, the sun was shining brightly outside, and the protagonist and the old man prepared for a competition to see who could make the most pills in half an hour. The old man was happy because he had been making pills for decades, and making a huge batch in a short period of time was his specialty. The old man was incredibly happy because his furnace was of an incredibly high level. He was sure that the protagonist would have to make a discount after their battle. While the protagonist was not standing still and was able to obtain the pill base in an instant, the old man was shocked. He couldn't understand how Fong was able to produce such a huge amount of pills so quickly. The old man looked at the protagonist who seemed to be unable to cope with the load he had taken on. At that time, the old man rejoiced, because he thought that the hero would definitely not be able to finish the pills. Suddenly Fong shouted that his batch of pills had already been prepared. The old man didn't understand how the protagonist could make the pills so fast, because the old man hadn't even started the process. At that time the protagonist complained that the servant had brought too small a pot, and he said that there was no bigger pot. Fong said he would cut the poor servant's wages, who cried in the background. The old man was surprised that the protagonist had the time to even complain about the size of the pot. During this fight, literally half an hour into the battle, the protagonist had prepared an incredible amount of pills that looked like first-class goods, while his opponent had prepared a couple pills, and they weren't of the highest quality. The old man stood there and couldn't believe that the protagonist's pills were of first-class quality, while his were just ordinary rejects. The old man didn't understand why the protagonist was selling pills of lower quality than he was capable of making. Then Fong explained that those pills were made by his apprentice who was practicing alchemy. The old man was completely shattered. After all, a hero can allow his apprentice to train on such expensive pills. Even the old man's clan couldn't afford such a thing. Suddenly, the old man fell to his knees, then began to beg the protagonist to accept him as a student, while promising to buy the guy's pills at double the price. The protagonist felt awkward and said that he could not take the old man as a disciple, then made a counteroffer, namely to give some instructions to the old man, but with a condition. Then the protagonist pointed his finger at the girl, and began to say that his condition was that the old man would give the girl to him. A little while later in the house, the girl hit the table with alcohol with all her might, saying that the protagonist had just picked up a new girl right in front of her. She drank just an unbelievable amount of alcohol and screamed about how she was losing her young master. The protagonist asked if it was true that the girl was just a servant who happened to be picked up and hired, and she said she was, then asked why the protagonist was asking about such a thing. Fong started asking the girl to stop pretending and said that no matter how much she dyed her skin, he would always recognize her. The girl seemed shocked by this turn of events, whereupon she instantly turned gray and asked what exactly the hero was going to do. She was actually the High Mistress of the Moon Grotto. The protagonist started talking about the girl killing a member of the Yi family, and that was the reason why Fong wanted to help her. It turns out that in the protagonist's past life, the girl had saved his life more than once, and he just had to repay her for that kindness. She began to say that she couldn't just run away because the Yi family dared to take her palace by force. Suddenly, the voices of the men were heard and they reported that the Yi family had broken in looking for the woman. She instantly started pulling out her weapon thinking that it was the protagonist who had snitched on her. She started to move towards the guy with the intention of attacking, while the hero easily grabbed the woman's arm, after which he said that she was injured and couldn't do anything to him, then warned that if she wanted to live she had to obey him. The girl began to be embarrassed while the hero ordered her to undress. At that time, a girl came up the stairs, and it turned out to be an officer of the Yi family guard, who assumed that there was a person in the Qin family who had killed members of the Yi family. She also made an angry expression on her face and added that if they found the girl, the Qin family would be considered traitors and criminals. She instantly kicked the doors to the room, with orders to get out, after which she saw the naked protagonist sharing his bed with a woman. The girl began to shout that she had come to look for the criminal and assumed that she was in bed with Fong, at which time the hero began to get angry because the girl dared to break into his room and accuse his woman of being a criminal. At that time the officer began to say that if she was wrong about the girl, she would kneel before the protagonist. She was sure that the girl was the culprit, and was preparing to look under the blanket. Then she opened the blanket and saw a completely different girl. She was shocked because she had been told that the perpetrator had injuries on her body, but this girl had none. Then the officer instantly grabbed the girl's arm in an attempt to test her strength. Suddenly she realized that this was just an ordinary girl who hadn't even trained and was very scared. At the time, the protagonist behind her back was smiling, and asked if the officer had calmed down after trashing his bedroom. At that time, the officer shouted that it couldn't be like that, while the protagonist looked at her carefully, because the injuries really couldn't be cured so easily. But Fong applied a special powder that was able to hide the wounds. The protagonist also gave the girl a healing pill that didn't even exist in this era, and it hid the girl's level, while the officer couldn't understand how everything ended up like this. The officer was about to leave the protagonist's chambers as soon as possible, while Fong reminded her that she never fulfilled the promise she made to him. The officer instantly grabbed her sword, shouting that she was acting in accordance with the law. She approached the protagonist, threatening him with the sword, and shouted that they low-grade Qin family members better not behave like this in the presence of a Yi family member. The protagonist instantly struck the mad woman, then asked how dare she behave like that towards him, who easily dared to destroy an entire unit of the Situ family. The girl was very frightened, for she didn't understand what the protagonist was about to do now. At that time, the protagonist ordered the girl to bow down and apologize to his girlfriend, and if she didn't, he would just finish her off. The officer began to say that she was a member of a noble family and would not apologize to a common girl, while the protagonist started counting down and struck a blow directly on the woman's face, then prepared to behead this insolent person. At that time, the officer realized that the force of the protagonist was very large. She certainly did not look very good. At that time, the protagonist made a creepy face after the countdown ended, and prepared to execute the enemy right on the spot. The officer instantly fell to her knees, then began to beg for forgiveness from the girl. The protagonist returned the officer's sword and ordered her to leave as soon as possible. She instantly started running away with tears in her eyes and a broken face, while the girl started screaming for the hero to forget what her naked body looked like. Then she embarrassedly started screaming how the guy could call her a spouse. At that time, the protagonist realized that as soon as the girl is cured, he is waiting for a terrible punishment, because her character is just fire. The officer went around the territory of the protagonist and complained about Fong, and how he dared to do to her. Suddenly she noticed a strange cocoon tied to a tree, then instantly decided that it is the same criminal, and prepared to attack, rejoicing that the hero will get what he deserves. Suddenly, the protagonist and the girl heard the officer's heartbreaking scream. Fong immediately ran outside, where the girl was sitting on the ground, screaming that her face was hurt and accusing the protagonist of framing her. She started yelling that she would definitely make the protagonist pay for what he did. Then the guy instantly pinned the girl against a tree, because she dared to free the monster. Fong started yelling that the girl had just freed the monster that they had managed to seal with great difficulty. But she said that it was just an ordinary monster that couldn't do anything terrible. Suddenly there were shouts of people that there was a monster. The girl instantly changed in her expression. The protagonist along with the officer headed in the direction of the screams, after which the officer's face twisted from the picture she saw in front of her. It turned out that all of the girl's troops had died in agony, and she couldn't believe that such a thing could happen. At that time, the protagonist realized that judging by the tracks of the monster was moving in the direction of the city. He also realized that the old man would not be able to return in time to deal with the monster. The protagonist thought that he could theoretically deal with the monster. He also knew that the enemy had secret skills, and last time the protagonist just quickly dealt with the enemy, But if the monster used his skills in the city, they would be in for a bloodbath. While the monster's foot left the forest area, it was rapidly approaching the city, which had a huge number of people in it. The officer on her knees begged the protagonist to keep silent about the fact that she was the cause of all the trouble and her people were killed because she released the monster. While Fong ordered her to get away, the hero ordered the man to notify the town as soon as possible that a dangerous monster was approaching them, and he instantly proceeded with the order. The protagonist began to tell the girl that he needed to prepare for battle, then told her that the girl needed to stay close to him at all times, as he was intent on protecting her. The girl stood there and couldn't understand why Fong wanted to protect her. She had originally planned to hide. Then she looked back with a grayish expression and looked at the huge gate, thinking that she needed to find a safe place. At that time in the city, people in the city were fleeing in panic because of the monster approaching them. At that time, the monster had practically entered the city, destroying the flimsy defenses. The monster completely broke through the blockade and screamed with all its might, while the people kept trying to escape from the monster. Suddenly the prince was heard saying that anyone who tried to escape would be killed, which surprised the people. The prince began to say that as soon as he appeared in the city, as this monster appeared, then said that people are obliged to help him defeat this monster. The prince's squad was incredibly excited about this opportunity, because recently all the glory had gone to the Qin family. They were going to deal with this monster. The people were very scared. They were not given the opportunity to escape. While the prince and his men were preparing for battle, the servant of the protagonist shouted that the prince would have to start evacuating people. The prince began to mock the Qin family member, as they are afraid of even one monster. After that, the prince's squad instantly started their attack. They were getting closer and closer to the monster, who was in anger. The servant tried to warn the young men that the monster was too strong, and if they didn't have the level of a great master, they couldn't win. At that time, the boys completely ignored the servant's words and continued their unsuccessful attempts to destroy the monster. The prince was right above the huge monster, after which he instantly attacked it with his sword, causing the monster to be nailed to the ground. The prince's squad stood over the monster, which showed no signs of life. Suddenly the people were surprised and rejoiced that the prince had dealt with the monster so quickly and easily. The servant began to shout that the monster was not defeated and that he should close his mouth as soon as possible, otherwise he would use forbidden techniques. The sword was inserted into the monster's mouth, while the prince's men were laughing at the Qin family. Suddenly the monster started to look quite terrifying. Then it instantly started screaming with all its might, which surprised the prince and his men. The monster's scream instantly spread to the entire city. The servant began to shout for people to leave as soon as possible, as it was too dangerous, while the monster continued to make terrible sounds. The prince began to forbid people to leave the place. He was sure of his victory. Then he prepared to kill the monster, while behind him appeared a monster much bigger than the one that was lying on the ground. The huge monster looked much more terrifying than the previous one. It emitted an incredibly strong aura, while the prince and his men couldn't understand how or why another monster had appeared. The monster instantly sent the arrogant prince flying with its most powerful fist strike. After that, the prince typed into the building at a tremendous speed. His men could not understand how this was possible. While the prince coughed up blood, he literally lost the ability to move because of one blow, which suggested that the monster had at least a level 2 grandmaster. The prince's team instantly gathered to attack the monster, in an attempt to avenge the prince. Then instantly their weapons were broken against the incredibly tough skin of this monster, and all the guys were terrified of what could be waiting for them next. The monster instantly attacked the guys, causing them to take incredible damage. All the guards started running away, and panic started among the people. While another monster rose to his feet, and the older monster pointed his finger at someone, and the younger one instantly started approaching the people at a great speed, while making eerie sounds. People were fleeing in panic, while the servant stood still and realized that if this continues, none of the people will not be able to get out of this city alive. The monster was already behind the backs of the people, and was preparing to attack the poor man, but suddenly the servant stood up for the common people, and blocked the attack of the monster. He ordered the people not to worry about him and just run away as soon as possible. He was trying his best to buy as much time as possible for the common people, asking only that his corpse be handed over to the Qin family. The people thanked the guy, and swiftly ran away trying to save their lives. At that time, the servant realized that the hero had ordered him to protect the city in every way possible, and he was going to do everything he could to protect the people. The servant managed to redirect the monster's incredibly strong attack and escape. Then he instantly dodged to the side and prepared to strike with his blade, saying that he would not let the monster harm the innocent citizens. He attempted to attack the monster, but in the end it only resulted in his sword instantly breaking against the monster's tough skin, the enemy instantly sending the man flying with an incredibly strong blow, from which the servant flew as far as the peaceful people fleeing from the monster, who were very frightened. The monster began to approach the people who were very worried about the guy who was lying on the ground and did not move. The servant instantly grabbed the monster by the leg, and then began to beg the villagers to save their lives and just leave him. At the same time, the servant was thinking that he had promised to protect the civilians, and he was obligated to do his best, even if it was at the cost of his life. At that time, the monster began to strike hard right on the back of the guy who was trying his best to hold the monster back. The monster was not going to stop and continued beating this valiant warrior, who felt incredible pain and understood that very soon he will die protecting the people of this city. While the prince couldn't believe what he was seeing, as he had lost the ability to move after missing just one blow, while the guy from the Qin family with only one level of body hardening was able to continue fighting. As the monster struck an incredibly powerful blow directly at the guy, and he started flying at a tremendous speed, after which all the people around him cried, because he gave his life to protect them, while the servant continued to fall down thinking that this is definitely the end. Falling right into the clutches of the monster, he thought that he had been a coward all his life, but today he could not do otherwise. Suddenly, the protagonist instantly saved his servant, right before the monster struck. The servant didn't realize what had just happened, and then was glad that the protagonist had arrived. At that time, the prince was angry that Fong had arrived and saved his subordinate, while the servant apologized for not being able to hold the monster long enough, and the hero thanked the servant for what he had done, because he had bought enough time, after which Fong made a mad look while emitting a huge amount of energy, and said that the guys should just trust him. While the monster was preparing to finish off the protagonist, who was incredibly angry at the monster and was going to take revenge on it for what it had done to his men. At that time, the prince rejoiced because he thought that today the protagonist will die, because the monster was at least at the level of a great master. At that time, the hero successfully attacked the monster with great power, and words that once he had already won. From the force of the blow of the protagonist, the monster began to fly at great speed and destroy everything in its path with its body. The monster was shaking in pain and seemed to have lost its ability to move. While the prince did not understand how this was possible, Fong was able to defeat such a strong monster with just one blow, while people were incredibly happy that the protagonist was able to deal with the monster. At the same time, the second monster activated and was right behind the protagonist, and then struck an incredibly powerful blow directly at Feng's body, which began to fly at great speed and destroy everything that collided with his body. People began to worry about the hero, because this monster was even stronger than the previous one, while the prince rejoiced, because with this monster the protagonist will not be able to cope. Suddenly the prince's face changed dramatically when he realized that something was clearly wrong. While the monster was preparing for another attack, the prince noticed that there was not even the slightest damage on the main character's body after such a strong missed attack. Fong started shouting for his subordinate to carry the pill as soon as possible, while the man rushed towards the protagonist at a great speed with a smile on his face. Fong instantly pulled out the blade that was inside the pill, then prepared for battle, emitting a fire-shaped aura. The prince started shouting in his voice that it was all just useless. He said that the weapon simply couldn't harm this monster, while the enemy tried to attack the protagonist, who prepared to fight with his sword. Fong instantly delivered a powerful strike with his fire blade right on the monster's body, after which a huge amount of flames burst out and began to cover a huge area of land. The monster began to scream in pain as it burned and couldn't do anything about it, while the humans cheered at what was happening. Just a few moments later, the monster fell to the ground where its body continued to burn in flames. The prince was very frightened and angry. He did not understand how the protagonist had the strength to deal with a monster of this level with just one blow. The protagonist thought that he knew perfectly well from the beginning that ordinary weapons could not wound the monster. For this reason, he used a pill to strengthen the body, which causes a flame on the weapon that can wound the monster, and what the man brought was a special pill that was created by Fong to destroy such monsters. At that time, another monster came to his senses and started screaming with all his might, after which the monster started running away from the city with all his might. The protagonist was surprised that after the monster saw the death of his fellow monster, he immediately started running away, after which Fong prepared to strike, saying that the monster had not yet paid for what he had done, after which the hero with all his might threw his sword in the direction of the enemy, and a moment later the weapon stabbed into the leg of the fleeing monster, who instantly fell to the ground and began to scream in pain with all his might. The protagonist began to move closer, while saying that the monsters had allowed themselves to cripple his servant so badly. Then Fong once again threw the weapon directly at the monster, intending to take revenge for what they had done to his human. The monster continued to scream in pain from the wounds and the flames that were not extinguished at all. The protagonist began to pull out other weapons from the pillory, while saying that this was not the end. Then a huge amount of weapons began to fly towards the enemy, who instantly took a huge amount of damage and was completely covered in flames, causing him to scream with all his might. While the protagonist looked disdainfully at the dying enemy, thinking that they were being approached by an energy much scarier than those monsters. The prince was shaking with fear, because he began to realize that the protagonist had managed to become much stronger again, while the people were incredibly happy, because Fong was able to defeat such incredible monsters, for which they sincerely thanked the guy. Fong ordered the people not to approach as he felt that a huge amount of demonic energy was very close by. While a man stood behind a tree and watched carefully, it turned out that it was the same girl who thought that the hero was really incredibly strong, then thought about just running away, taking advantage of all this chaos. She instantly started to leave the place, whereupon an incredibly creepy monster that seemed to be much stronger than the previous two appeared right in front of her. It stared with its red eyes directly at the girl while emitting the energy of the dead, causing the girl to be very frightened, for she was unable to resist something so strong. She was very scared, while the monster instantly grabbed the girl with its huge hand. Then the people noticed the monster and started shouting that another monster had arrived. Fong instantly ordered the people to hide, for in front of them was the undead king himself, who had at least 3 leveled great masters. At that time, the girl was shaking in pain. It seemed that the monster was about to crush her with ease, and she wasn't even able to resist such a great power. The girl also realized that if she even tried to use her power, the officer who was next to her would not give her peace after such a thing, while the monster prepared to eat the girl alive. The girl began to think about using her power because in any case she would have died, and so she would at least get a chance to survive. Suddenly something at a great speed flew right over the head of the monster. It turned out that it was the main character who repeated his words that no one has the right to harm his woman. He instantly grabbed the girl who was falling to the ground. Then she was surprised that Fong reacted so quickly and saved her life. He put the girl on the ground, then began to say that the girl would not risk her strength and life after all he had promised to protect her. The protagonist began to say that the girl should be careful because the undead king is targeting her. He is trying to swallow her to increase his power. The protagonist began to approach the monster, saying that if the girl really wants to escape so badly, then let her choose at least not the route through the forest because it is too dangerous. The girl was incredibly confused and surprised that the protagonist for her sake was going to fight the undead king himself, while the enemy was rapidly approaching the protagonist. Fong realized that there were no more weapons he could use, so he prepared to fight with his fists while thinking that he would have to try hard to win this battle. While the enemy's fist instantly appeared right in front of the protagonist, after which the enemy successfully struck an incredible strong blow, from which Shit Hero instantly began to cough with all his might, after which he flew into the air. The girl shouted that the protagonist would run away. She asked not to risk his life for him while the guy was incredibly angry. He thought about the fact that in a previous life when approaching a wave of monsters, hero was asked to run away. The girl told the protagonist to leave because he couldn't fight while the guy wants to be there to help. At that time the girl said that the demons need the protagonist because he is a genius alchemist who opposes the demons. The girl was in a terrible state and soon she will die. For this reason she begged the hero to run away. After all, at least she will be able to buy him enough time. While Fong couldn't believe that she wanted to sacrifice herself and didn't want to admit it, the protagonist was pinned to the ground by the monster and thought about the fact that in his past life he lost both the girl and the world he swore to protect. Then Fong turned his attention to the huge pill that was lying nearby. then started to look with pain in his eyes, thinking that he wouldn't let the girl die anymore. Then the guy instantly smashed the pill with his fist. The main character's eyes began to emit flames, and he shouted that he would never leave the girl again and prepared to attack with fire energy. After that, he instantly attacked the monster's face, and huge gusts of flame began to fill the space around him. The protagonist struck a monstrous number of blows directly at the monster. While the girl was surprised that the guy shrouded his body in flame pills, she realized that now Fong was fighting for her, completely risking his life. After a moment in that part of the forest, there was an incredibly powerful explosion, after which the protagonist remained standing over the corpse, just defeated monster, which was burning in the flames. The girl was worried about the protagonist, while the prince was incredibly angry at what had happened. All the people gathered and didn't realize that the protagonist could really deal with such a strong enemy. The officer asked the man why he didn't come to the aid of the protagonist who had just almost been killed. The man began to say that the protagonist would never lose, and that he was fighting on the verge of death on purpose, while the protagonist himself was standing over the corpse of a defeated and incredibly strong opponent. The girl thought that she could easily escape because now all people's attention is focused on the protagonist, while the man helped Fong to stand, because after such a battle the protagonist is very tired. Fong began to look in the direction where the girl was standing, thinking about whether she was okay. But in that place the girl was not there. It seemed that she just vanished. The guy immediately realized that the girl just left, as suddenly she grabbed the protagonist's hand, then asked the protagonist for permission to help him. Fong was surprised that the girl didn't leave. At that time she didn't understand why the guy thought she would leave after all he bought her. Then she added that the main character had said that she was his woman. While she couldn't understand why she didn't leave after she had the opportunity, she remembered that since she was a little girl, her mother had forced her to be strong, and she had to always be the strongest. After she was born, the girl could never experience a sense of peace, but today she was protected by Fong. She thought about the fact that the protagonist had a power that was able to calm her heart. The girl thought that her revenge of the Yi family would be in the future, but now she wanted to spend more time with the protagonist. At that time, the servant was incredibly happy for his master, and rejoiced that he was all right. Suddenly all the people were covered by a huge shadow. The protagonist did not understand what happened, and where the shadow came from, but after he looked up he was shocked and scared at the same time. In front of him appeared an incredibly creepy creature that looked at the protagonist very carefully. He did not understand when this mountain appeared and it scared him very much, while people do not understand what the protagonist is looking at now, because they saw absolutely nothing in the direction where Fong looked. The girl was worried about the protagonist, while he said with a horrified look on his face that he was fine. People were shouting that the protagonist should rest as soon as possible, while the guy remembered what kind of creature this mountain was. It was an Earth Mother who was much stronger than ordinary monsters, for she could control poisonous insects and monsters, sending them into battle as soldiers. Also, this creature could take on the appearance of the area it was in. It was a great creature that was also incredibly good at disguising itself. The protagonist remembered that the birth of the Earth Mother in his past life foreshadowed the birth of the great demon that destroyed the demon city. With a serious expression, the protagonist thought that the great demon would probably complete its resurrection very soon. In the past life of the protagonist after the demon resurrected, the Earth Mother also attacked people, and it was from that moment that mankind slowly but surely began to die. The protagonist thought that in order to deal with the disaster that will await him in the future, he should be very well prepared. A few days later, people began to tell each other that they almost died because of the prince's deeds, while the news about the protagonist who was able to destroy incredibly strong monsters also became incredibly popular, and even children wanted to become like Fong. After the news reached the family, the grandmother expressed her wish for Fong to return to the capital to improve himself. The protagonist refused this request, then said that he had a few requests, namely to tell all the clans that they should start preparing for the fact that soon the world will be hit by demon attacks. Then the hero also asked for the opportunity to enter the Dangu, which surprised some of the clan members. It was actually an incredible alchemy pavilion with incredibly strict rules. The grandmother believed in the potential of the protagonist and used her connections to get one place for the protagonist, and from that moment on, a month had passed. Inside the pavilion, the girl introduced the protagonist as the new alchemy student. Fong greeted everyone and introduced himself and said that he was from the Qin family, People scoffed paralegally, saying that the Qin family was the weakest of the 5 families. They laughed and seemed to think the protagonist was far below their status and strength, while the protagonist sat silently at his seat thinking that he had come to this place for a completely different reason. It turned out that the protagonist had come to this place to obtain a demonic treasure, namely the sword Luotian. This sword once belonged to the king of demons, and only with the help of this weapon the protagonist will be able to resist the enemies that will arise at him in the future. In reality, no one is able to lift this sword now, and this place uses its demonic energy to temper the alchemists. The protagonist thought that he must get the sword by any means, because the future of mankind depends on it. While the girl started yelling that Fong dares to ignore her, the girl started calling the protagonist the scum of the Qin family, with anger on her face. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this manhwa and want to see it continue, please like it and write about it in the comments, and I will try to publish a video every day. Thank you all again for your support. I really like reading what you write. Thank you all. See you soon.